In a small, bustling courthouse in the heart of downtown Chicago, the air buzzed with tension. The room was filled with people, some nervous, some indifferent, and others simply waiting for their turn to face the judge. Among them sat Jasmine Carter, a woman whose calm demeanor masked the weight of her responsibilities. She wasn't just another person in the crowd. She was a highly skilled detective with the United States Secret Service, USSS. Her sharp mind and years of experience had earned her a reputation for solving cases that seemed impossible to crack. Jasmine had spent weeks tracking down leads on a dangerous counterfeiting ring operating within the city. This group wasn't just printing fake money. They were laundering it through legitimate businesses and using their profits to bribe officials. The case had grown more complex over time, leading Jasmine straight into the courtroom where one of the key suspects was being tried. Today, she wasn't there as an investigator or enforcer, but as a witness. Her role was to provide crucial evidence that would connect the dots between the suspect and the larger criminal network. Dressed casually to blend into the surroundings, Jasmine looked like any other observer in the room. She wore a simple blazer over a plain shirt, her badge safely tucked away out of sight. It wasn't unusual for her to dress down during undercover operations. It helped her stay unnoticed until the right moment. But today, blending in felt different. As she glanced around the crowded room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Little did she know, her presence would soon become the center of attention. The courtroom itself was a mix of old charm and modern practicality. Wooden benches lined the walls, worn smooth by decades of use, while fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead. A large American flag hung behind the judge's bench, its colors slightly faded from years of exposure to sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The faint hum of whispered conversations filled the space, punctuated occasionally by the sharp crack of a gavel calling for order. At the front of the room sat the defendant, a man named Marcus Reed. He was a well-known figure in certain circles, infamous for his ability to evade trouble despite his shady dealings. With slicked-back hair and an expensive suit, he exuded confidence even as he faced serious charges. His lawyer, a silver-haired man with a reputation for winning tough cases, leaned close to him whispering strategy. Across the aisle, the prosecution team shuffled papers preparing their arguments. Everyone in the room seemed focused except perhaps the bailiff, who lazily flipped through a magazine near the door. Then came the entrance of Judge Richard Langley, a man whose name carried both respect and notoriety. Known for his sharp tongue and rigid adherence to procedure, Langley commanded authority wherever he went. Tall and thin, with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, he carried himself with an air of superiority that often intimidated those who appeared before him. Over the years, he had gained a reputation for dismissing witnesses he deemed unimportant and cutting off lawyers mid-sentence if they failed to meet his standards. While many admired his dedication to the law, others criticized him for his lack of patience and occasional condescension. As Judge Langley took his seat, the room fell silent. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the room briefly, and then called the first case to order. The proceedings moved quickly, each side presenting their arguments efficiently. When Jasmine's name was announced as a witness, she rose from her seat and approached the stand. The sound of her heels clicking against the tiled floor echoed softly in the otherwise quiet room. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, others skeptical, but she kept her focus ahead. Judge Langley barely looked up when Jasmine stepped forward. Instead, he scribbled something on a notepad, his pen moving rapidly across the paper. When he finally glanced at her, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Perhaps it was her casual attire or the fact that she didn't immediately announce her credentials, but whatever it was, it triggered a reaction in him. Without looking directly at her, he muttered under his breath, "Another bystander here to waste our time?" Though his voice was low, it carried enough for nearby spectators to hear. A few chuckled nervously, unsure whether to take his comment seriously. One of the defense attorneys seized the opportunity to mock her further, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Your Honor," he said loudly, addressing the judge but clearly intending for everyone to hear, "I think we're all eager to see what this civilian has to contribute." The remark drew scattered laughter from the gallery, though it died down quickly when Jasmine turned her steady gaze toward the attorney. She didn't react angrily or defensively. Instead, she stood tall, her posture unwavering. Years of working in high-pressure situations had taught her the value of composure. Letting emotions take over wouldn't help her now. Staying calm and collected would. "Your Honor," Jasmine began, her voice clear and measured, cutting through the lingering murmurs in the room. "I assure you, my presence here is both relevant and necessary." Her words carried a quiet authority that made even the most skeptical listeners pause. For a brief moment, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how Judge Langley would respond. But the judge wasn't ready to concede just yet. Leaning back in his chair, he regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Let's see what credentials you have, then," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It was clear he expected nothing impressive, perhaps a junior officer or someone tangentially involved in the investigation. What he didn't realize was that he was about to be proven very wrong. Unfazed by his attitude, Jasmine reached into her blazer and pulled out her gleaming gold USSS badge. Holding it aloft for everyone to see, she introduced herself once again. "Detective Jasmine Carter, United States Secret Service. I've spent the last decade protecting this country from financial crimes and threats against its leaders." The transformation in the room was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people craned their necks to get a better look. Even the bailiff froze mid-step, staring at the badge in disbelief. For Judge Langley, the revelation hit like a thunderclap. His earlier mockery vanished, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "Your Secret Service?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine nodded curtly, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. And if you'd allow me to proceed, I can explain why I'm here today." The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers and chuckles, was now utterly silent. All eyes were on Jasmine, waiting to hear what she had to say next. Judge Langley, visibly shaken, gestured for her to continue. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. What had started as a routine hearing had turned into something far more significant, and Jasmine was ready to seize the opportunity. This was more than just a personal victory for Jasmine. It was a reminder of the importance of respect and fairness in every situation. People often judged others based on appearances, making assumptions that could lead to costly mistakes. But Jasmine knew better than anyone that true strength lay in preparation, professionalism, and the courage to stand firm when challenged. And as she prepared to deliver her testimony, she did so with the knowledge that justice depended not on titles or uniforms, but on truth and integrity. As Jasmine stood at the witness stand, her presence commanded a strange kind of attention. The courtroom, once alive with murmurs and side conversations, had quieted down to an almost eerie stillness. Judge Richard Langley's sarcastic remark about her credentials lingered in the air like a challenge waiting to be answered. His earlier smirk, though now fading, had left its mark, not just on Jasmine, but on everyone watching. It was clear that the judge hadn't taken her seriously, and his dismissive tone had set the stage for what felt like a showdown. Jasmine didn't waste time responding with anger or frustration. She knew better than to let emotions dictate her actions. Instead, she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and reached into her blazer. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if she wanted every eye in the room to follow her hand as it pulled out something small yet unmistakably significant, a gleaming gold badge emblazoned with the emblem of the United States Secret Service. The badge caught the light from the overhead fluorescent bulbs, reflecting a subtle shimmer that seemed to silence even the faintest rustle of paper in the room. Holding the badge aloft for everyone to see, Jasmine introduced herself again. This time with a clarity and authority that left no room for doubt. "Detective Jasmine Cruz, United States Secret Service," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I've spent over a decade investigating financial crimes and protecting our nation's leaders." Her words hung in the air, each syllable carrying weight. For a moment, there was complete silence, followed by a collective gasp from the spectators seated in the gallery. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and whispers erupted like tiny waves crashing against the shore. Judge Langley, who had been leaning back in his chair with an air of superiority just moments ago, suddenly sat upright. His face paled visibly and his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He blinked rapidly, staring at the badge as though trying to process what he was seeing. "Your Secret Service?" He finally managed to stammer, his voice trembling with disbelief. Gone was the confident, condescending tone he'd used earlier. In its place was uncertainty, and perhaps a hint of fear. The defense attorney, who had eagerly joined in mocking Jasmine just minutes before, now looked utterly mortified. His smug expression melted away, replaced by wide-eyed panic. He shifted, uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Even Marcus Reed, the defendant sitting beside him, appeared uneasy. Up until now, Reed had maintained a cocky demeanor, seemingly convinced that the case would go in his favor. But Jasmine's revelation threw a wrench into his plans, and the confidence drained from his face like water through a sieve. For Jasmine, the reaction was satisfying, but not because she enjoyed proving people wrong. It wasn't personal, it was professional. She had faced skepticism like this countless times throughout her career, especially as a black woman in a field dominated by men. People often underestimated her, assuming she didn't belong in high-stakes situations simply because of how she looked or dressed. But Jasmine had learned long ago that underestimation could work in her favor. When people underestimated her, they let their guard down, and that's when she struck. "Your Honor," Jasmine continued, addressing Judge Langley directly, "if you'll permit me, I'd like to explain why I'm here today and provide the evidence relevant to this case." Her tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for refusal. Judge Langley, still reeling from the shock, nodded weakly and gestured for her to proceed. The transformation in his demeanor was striking. Where once there had been arrogance, there was now hesitation. Where there had been mockery, there was now respect, or at least the appearance of it. As Jasmine began speaking, the courtroom became eerily quiet. Every word she uttered carried weight, and every detail she provided painted a clearer picture of the larger conspiracy at play. She explained how her investigation had uncovered ties between Marcus Reed and a sophisticated counterfeiting operation. This wasn't some small-time scam. It was a well-organized network that spanned multiple states and involved millions of dollars. Worse still, the group had connections to corrupt officials who helped them cover their tracks and evade justice. Jasmine presented documents, photographs, and audio recordings, all meticulously gathered during months of painstaking work. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the story, exposing the depth of the corruption and implicating not only Reed, but also others within the system. As she spoke, the tension in the room grew palpable. Reporters scribbled furiously, in their notebooks capturing every detail. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse, capturing images of the drama unfolding inside. Spectators exchanged glances, whispering among themselves about the bombshell testimony they were witnessing. But the most telling reaction came from Judge Langley himself. As Jasmine laid out her findings, his discomfort became increasingly obvious. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the files submitted as evidence. At one point he paused, his eyes narrowing as he read a name mentioned in the report. It was clear that he recognized it, perhaps too well. His face turned an even deeper shade of red, and he shifted uneasily in his seat. The defense team, meanwhile, looked like deer caught in headlights. They exchanged panicked glances, clearly unprepared for the scope of Jasmine's presentation. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by desperation. One of the attorneys whispered urgently to Reed, who responded with a sharp shake of his head. Whatever they had planned to argue in court now seemed irrelevant in the face of overwhelming evidence. Throughout it all, Jasmine remained composed. Her years of training had taught her the importance of staying calm under pressure, and she drew strength from knowing that she was doing her job, not for recognition or glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Justice, she believed, wasn't about appearances or assumptions. It was about truth, and today she was determined to uncover it. As her testimony continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. What had started as a routine hearing had transformed into something far more consequential. The initial mockery and dismissal had given way to awe and respect. Even those who might have doubted Jasmine at first now listened intently, hanging on her every word. For many in the room, this was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a lesson in humility and accountability. When Jasmine finished speaking, there was a long pause before Judge Langley cleared his throat and announced, "A recess." The bailiff called for order as people began filing out of the courtroom, buzzing with excitement and speculation. Outside, reporters scrambled to interview anyone willing to comment on the shocking turn of events. Meanwhile, Jasmine stepped down from the witness stand, her expression calm but resolute. She knew the battle wasn't over yet, but she also knew she had made a difference. This moment wasn't just about exposing corruption or proving her worth. It was about sending a message that no matter how powerful someone might seem, no one was above the law. And for Detective Jasmine Cruz, that was more than enough. With the courtroom still reeling from the bombshell revelation of her identity, Jasmine wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. She knew that every second counted, and she wasn't about to let the momentum slip away. Her voice remained steady, her words precise as she began unraveling the intricate web of corruption she had spent months piecing together. This wasn't just a story of counterfeit money. It was a tale of greed, power, and betrayal that reached far beyond Marcus, Reed, and his accomplices. Jasmine started by explaining the origins of her investigation. It had begun with a tip-off, a seemingly minor detail that most investigators might have overlooked. A series of suspicious transactions caught the attention of federal authorities, leading them to dig deeper. What they uncovered was alarming. An organized counterfeiting ring operating across multiple states, printing fake currency so convincingly designed that even seasoned experts struggled to identify it as fraudulent. But what made this operation truly dangerous wasn't just its sophistication, it was its connections. The counterfeiters weren't working alone. They had allies in high places, individuals who used their influence to shield the criminals from scrutiny while profiting off their illegal activities. As Jasmine spoke, she projected images onto a screen at the front of the courtroom. Bank records, surveillance photos, and intercepted communications appeared one after another, each piece of evidence painting a clearer picture of the conspiracy. One document showed a ledger detailing payments made to unnamed consultants, code for bribes given to corrupt officials. Another image displayed a grainy but unmistakable photo of Marcus Reed meeting with a man later identified as a local city council member. In yet another file, audio recordings revealed conversations discussing strategies to stall investigations and manipulate court outcomes. The defense team squirmed in their seats, visibly unnerved by the avalanche of incriminating material. Their earlier confidence, the smug grins and dismissive remarks, had evaporated completely. Even Marcus Reed, who had exuded arrogance since the trial began, now sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. He glanced nervously at his lawyer, searching for reassurance, but found none. The attorney himself looked like he wanted to disappear, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. Judge Langley, meanwhile, seemed trapped in a nightmare of his own making. As Jasmine presented her findings, his discomfort grew more pronounced. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents submitted as evidence, his brow furrowed in concentration, or perhaps dread. At one point, Jasmine mentioned a specific name during her testimony, a judge accused of accepting bribes to throw cases favorable to the counterfeiting ring. When she said it aloud, Judge Langley froze, his pen hovering mid-air above his notepad. The name was familiar, it was his. The realization hit him like a freight train. All the signs were there. The sudden influx of cash into his bank account, the expensive vacations he couldn't fully explain, the vague sense of unease whenever certain cases crossed his desk. He had convinced himself that he was untouchable, that no one would dare question his integrity. But now, standing before him was Detective Jasmine Cruz, armed with irrefutable proof of his involvement. For the first time in years, Judge Langley felt vulnerable and terrified. Back in the gallery, the spectators were riveted. Some leaned forward in their seats, straining to catch every word Jasmine said. Others whispered excitedly to their neighbors, speculating about the implications of her testimony. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, knowing they were witnessing history unfold. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward as journalists prepared to broadcast updates to a captivated public. Social media buzzed with hashtags related to the case as people debated whether justice would finally prevail. Jasmine's presentation wasn't just factual, it was compelling. She wove the dry details of financial records and legal documents into a narrative that resonated on a human level. She talked about the real-world impact of the counterfeiting ring, families losing savings when banks collapsed under the weight of fake currency, small businesses forced to close because they couldn't compete with artificially inflated markets, and honest citizens victimized by a system rigged against them. "This isn't just about numbers on a page," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's about trust. Trust in our institutions, trust in our leaders, and trust in the idea that justice will always win." Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Even those who might have doubted her earlier were now hanging on her every syllable. Judge Langley, however, seemed unable to meet her gaze. His earlier mockery had turned into shame, his arrogance replaced by fear. When Jasmine paused to allow the gravity of her testimony to sink in, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. No one dared breathe too loudly, afraid to disrupt the moment. Finally, Jasmine concluded her statement with a simple yet powerful declaration. "Justice isn't about appearances or assumptions," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about truth, and today we're closer than ever to uncovering it." With those words, she stepped back from the podium, her expression calm but resolute. The courtroom erupted into murmurs once again, the tension almost unbearable. Judge Langley called for a recess, his voice shaky and unsteady. As the bailiff ushered people out of the room, the atmosphere remained electric. Reporters jostled for position near the exits, eager to capture reactions from anyone willing to speak. Inside the courtroom, Jasmine packed up her files, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She knew the battle wasn't over. There would be appeals, denials, and attempts to discredit her work. But she also knew she had struck a decisive blow. For Jasmine, this moment wasn't just about vindication. It was about proving that perseverance and integrity could overcome even the deepest shadows. Throughout her career, she had faced countless challenges, many of them rooted in prejudice and bias. But she had never let those obstacles define her. Instead, she used them as fuel to push harder, to fight smarter, and to remind herself why she had chosen this path in the first place. As she walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the day's events settled over her shoulders. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she felt a spark of hope. Justice might not always come easily, but when pursued with courage and conviction, it could shine a light even in the darkest corners. And for Detective Jasmine Cruz, that was worth every sacrifice. The courtroom erupted into chaos the moment Judge Langley called for a recess. Reporters scrambled to their feet, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward as they tried to capture reactions from anyone willing to comment. Spectators buzzed with excitement, some whispering in hushed tones while others openly debated what they had just witnessed. The air was thick with anticipation, as though everyone sensed that this case was about to take a dramatic turn. For Jasmine, however, the real work was only beginning. As she stepped out of the courtroom, she was immediately surrounded by federal agents who had been waiting in the wings. They moved quickly but discreetly, ensuring that no one could eavesdrop on their conversation. "Detective Cruz," one of them said, his voice low and urgent, "we need you to brief us on everything you've uncovered so far. This goes higher than we thought." Jasmine nodded, her expression calm but focused. She had suspected for weeks that the corruption ran deeper than Marcus Reed and his counterfeiting operation, but now it was clear. The rot extended all the way into the judiciary itself. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Langley sat alone in his chambers, his face buried in his hands. The weight of Jasmine's testimony pressed down on him like a physical force. He replayed her words over and over, in his mind each syllable cutting deeper than the last. The name she had mentioned, the judge implicated in bribery schemes, was his own. There was no denying it. The evidence was irrefutable, and he knew there would be no escaping accountability this time. His arrogance, once a shield, now felt like a curse. How had he let himself become entangled in something so vile? Greed, he realized bitterly, had blinded him to the consequences of his actions. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines blared across every major media outlet. Secret Service detective exposes corrupt judge in counterfeiting scandal. Social media exploded with outrage and disbelief. Videos of Jasmine's testimony went viral, viewed millions of times within minutes. Comment sections filled with praise for her professionalism and courage, alongside calls for sweeping reforms in the justice system. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "No more corruption." The public demanded answers and accountability. Federal investigators wasted no time acting on Jasmine's findings. Armed with search warrants, they descended on multiple locations tied to the counterfeiting ring. Luxury homes, law offices, and even City Hall were raided as agents combed through documents, seized computers, and interviewed suspects. Each raid turned up more evidence linking powerful figures to the conspiracy. Among those arrested were several high-ranking officials, including the city council member captured in the surveillance photos Jasmine had shown in court. It was a domino effect. One arrest led to another, unraveling layer after layer of corruption. For Judge Langley, the reckoning came swiftly. Federal agents arrived at his chambers shortly after the recess ended, their badges gleaming as they announced his arrest. His face turned ghostly white as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the metallic sound echoing ominously in the otherwise silent room. Cameras captured the humiliating moment as he was led out of the courthouse, his head bowed and shoulders slumped. Gone was the imposing figure who had strutted into the courtroom earlier that day. In his place was a broken man, stripped of his authority and dignity. The fallout didn't stop there. As details of the investigation emerged, it became clear that Judge Langley wasn't the only judicial official involved. 2 other judges were implicated in the scandal, along with dozens of lawyers, police officers, and government employees. The sheer scale of the corruption shocked even seasoned investigators. What had started as a routine counterfeiting case had morphed into one of the largest exposés of systemic wrongdoing in recent history. The ripple effects reached far beyond Chicago, prompting federal oversight committees to launch inquiries into similar cases nationwide. Back at Secret Service headquarters, Jasmine briefed her superiors on the progress of the investigation. Her colleagues hailed her as a hero, praising not just her detective skills but also her poise under pressure. "You handled that courtroom like a pro," one senior agent told her, clapping her on the back. "Not many people could have pulled off what you did today." Jasmine accepted the compliments graciously but remained humble. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. "I just followed the evidence where it led." Despite the accolades, Jasmine couldn't shake the bittersweet feeling that lingered in the back of her mind. On one hand, she was proud of the work she had done. Justice had been served, or at least it was well on its way. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the frustration of being underestimated simply because of her race and gender. It wasn't the first time she had faced such bias, nor would it be the last. But each instance reminded her why her job mattered so much. Every victory against prejudice and corruption brought her closer to a world where competence and integrity spoke louder than appearances. In the days that followed, the story dominated the news cycle. Talk shows invited legal experts to analyze the case, while late-night hosts joked about Judge Langley's downfall. Memes featuring Jasmine's badge reveal flooded social media, turning her into an overnight sensation. Some dubbed her the Idairi detective who brought down a corrupt judge, while others simply called her a symbol of hope in a flawed system. Despite the attention, Jasmine stayed out of the spotlight as much as possible. She declined interview requests, preferring to focus on ensuring the investigation continued without interference. One evening, as she reviewed case files in her office, Jasmine reflected on everything that had transpired. The past few weeks had been grueling, both physically and emotionally. Yet despite the challenges, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her testimony hadn't just exposed corruption, it had reignited faith in the idea that justice could prevail, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And for Jasmine, that belief was worth fighting for. As she packed up her things to head home, a young officer knocked on her doorframe. "Detective Cruz?" he asked hesitantly. When she looked up, he smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Watching you in that courtroom inspired me. If I can be half the investigator you are someday, I'll consider myself lucky." Jasmine returned his smile, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Just remember," she said, "justice isn't about glory or recognition. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." With that, she grabbed her coat and walked out of the building, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be new cases, new challenges. But Jasmine was ready. For her, every step forward was a reminder that perseverance and integrity could overcome even the darkest obstacles. And as she disappeared into the night, the legacy of her actions continued to ripple outward, inspiring change in ways she might never fully realize. The weeks following the courtroom revelation were a whirlwind of activity, both for Jasmine and the nation at large. The scandal had grown into a national conversation, sparking debates about accountability, corruption, and the need for reform within the justice system. For Jasmine, however, the focus remained on ensuring that the investigation stayed on track. Every day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to bring those involved in the conspiracy to justice. Judge Richard Langley's arrest sent shockwaves through the legal community. Once a towering figure in the courthouse, he was now reduced to a disgraced former judge facing decades behind bars. His mugshot, circulated widely by news outlets, showed a man who looked years older than he had during his courtroom days. The weight of his crimes seemed etched into his face, a stark reminder of how quickly power and privilege could crumble under the weight of wrongdoing. Langley wasn't alone. Two other judges implicated in the scheme soon surrendered themselves to authorities, while several attorneys and government officials attempted to flee the country. None succeeded. Federal agents worked tirelessly to piece together the full extent of the corruption network. Raids uncovered hidden safes filled with cash, luxury cars purchased with laundered money, and encrypted devices containing incriminating messages. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of a system deeply infected by greed. The counterfeiting ring, once thought to be a standalone operation, turned out to be just one branch of a much larger tree. Investigators traced its roots to international connections, revealing ties to organized crime syndicates overseas. The complexity of the case grew exponentially, requiring collaboration between multiple agencies, including the FBI, IRS, and Department of Homeland Security. For Jasmine, this meant long hours poring over documents, analyzing data, and coordinating with colleagues across departments. Her office became a makeshift command center, cluttered with maps, charts, and photographs pinned to bulletin boards. Despite the exhaustion, she found solace in the knowledge that her work was making a difference. Every lead followed, every document reviewed, and every suspect identified brought them closer to dismantling the entire operation. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet reflection, where she allowed herself to process everything that had happened. One such moment came late one evening when she sat alone in her office, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. A notification popped up, another guilty plea from a mid-level conspirator. It was a small victory, but it mattered. She leaned back in her chair, letting the silence wash over her. The events of the past few weeks replayed in her mind. The courtroom confrontation, Judge Langley's stunned expression, the public outcry that followed. She thought about the countless people affected by the corruption, the families who lost their savings, the businesses forced to close, the honest citizens betrayed by leaders they trusted. Justice might not undo all the damage, but it could. Send a message. No one was above the law. Outside the walls of her office, the public response to the scandal continued to grow. Protesters gathered daily outside courthouses and city halls, demanding greater transparency and accountability. Community. Organizations launched campaigns to educate citizens about recognizing signs of corruption and reporting suspicious activity. Law schools hosted panel discussions featuring experts on ethics and governance, using the scandal as a case study to teach future lawyers and judges about integrity. Even Congress held hearings to examine weaknesses in oversight mechanisms, with lawmakers vowing to implement stricter regulations to prevent similar scandals in the future. Despite the progress, Jasmine knew the fight was far from over. Corruption didn't vanish overnight. Rooting it out required sustained effort and vigilance. She often reminded herself, and others, that exposing wrongdoing was only the first step. True change came from addressing the systemic issues that allowed such corruption to thrive in the first place. That meant reforming hiring practices, improving whistleblower protections, and fostering a culture of accountability at every level of government. Her resolve inspired those around her. Young officers looked up to her not just as a skilled detective, but as a role model. Many approached her seeking advice or simply to express their admiration. One afternoon, a rookie agent named Marcus stopped by her desk. "Detective Cruz," he began hesitantly, "I've been following your work on this case and, well, I just wanted to say thank you. You're proof that we can make a difference, even when things seem impossible." Jasmine smiled warmly, touched by his sincerity. "Don't thank me yet," she replied with a chuckle. "We still have a lot of work ahead of us." As the trial date approached, preparations intensified. Prosecutors built their case meticulously, ensuring they left no stone unturned. Evidence was cataloged, witnesses prepped, and strategies refined. Jasmine played a key role in this process, providing insights based on her first-hand experience. Her testimony would serve as the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, connecting the dots between the various players in the conspiracy. Defense teams, meanwhile, scrambled to mount counter-arguments, though their options were limited given the overwhelming amount of evidence against their clients. Public interest in the trial reached fever pitch. Media coverage was relentless, with news anchors dissecting every development and speculating about potential outcomes. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Chicago and Accountability Now, amplifying calls for reform. Schools incorporated lessons about the scandal into civics classes, teaching students about the importance of ethical leadership and civic responsibility. The case had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a catalyst for societal change. On the morning of the trial, the courthouse was packed to capacity. Reporters jostled for position near the entrance, eager to capture footage of the defendants as they arrived. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Spectators whispered, excitedly, exchanging theories about what might unfold. When Jasmine entered the room, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to her and she felt the weight of their expectations, but she carried herself with the same calm confidence that had defined her throughout the investigation. This was her moment to ensure that justice was served, not for personal glory, but for everyone who believed in fairness and truth. As the proceedings began, the prosecution laid out its case with precision. Witness after witness took the stand, corroborating Jasmine's findings and reinforcing the narrative of widespread corruption. Defense attorneys tried valiantly to poke holes in the arguments, but their efforts fell flat in the face of the mountain of evidence presented. By the time closing statements rolled around, it was clear that the verdict would hinge on whether the jury believed the defense's claims of isolated incidents versus the prosecution's portrayal of systemic. Jasmine watched intently as the jury deliberated, her heart pounding with anticipation. Days passed before they finally reached a decision. When the foreperson stood to announce the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty. One by one, each defendant was convicted on multiple counts, their faces pale with defeat. Cheers erupted from the gallery, tears streaming down the faces of those who had waited years for justice. Outside, crowds celebrated, chanting slogans and waving flags. For many, it was a triumph not just for Chicago but for the entire nation. For Jasmine, the victory was bittersweet. She had achieved what she set out to do, expose the truth and hold the guilty accountable, but the journey had taken its toll. The long hours, sleepless nights, and constant pressure had tested her endurance. Still, she refused to let fatigue dim her sense of purpose. As she walked out of the courthouse that evening, surrounded by colleagues congratulating her on a job well done, she paused to look up at the sky. The stars twinkled faintly, a reminder that even in darkness light could shine through. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but Jasmine was ready. She had faced adversity before and emerged stronger because of it. And as she drove home, the city lights reflecting off her windshield, she reminded herself of something she often told others. Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. And she was determined to keep moving forward. The months following the trial verdict brought a mix of relief, reflection, and renewed determination for Jasmine. The guilty sentences handed down to Marcus Reed, Judge Richard Langley, and their co-conspirators marked a significant victory, not just for her, but for the countless individuals who had been victimized by the corruption. Yet as the dust settled, Jasmine knew that true justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about healing wounds, restoring trust, and preventing future abuses of power. In the wake of the scandal, Chicago's legal system underwent sweeping reforms. Judges were required to undergo stricter background checks and mandatory ethics training. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, encouraging citizens and officials alike to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Transparency measures were introduced, including public databases where citizens could track court cases and financial transactions involving government officials. These changes didn't happen overnight, but they signaled a collective effort to rebuild faith in institutions that had been shaken to their core. Jasmine played an active role in shaping these reforms. Lawmakers invited her to testify before legislative committees, sharing insights from her years of experience investigating corruption. Her testimony was straightforward yet compelling, emphasizing the importance of accountability and integrity at every level of governance. Corruption thrives in secrecy, she told the committee members during one hearing. To fight it, we must shine a light on the darkest corners of our systems. Her words resonated deeply, earning applause from both sides of the aisle. Beyond policy changes, the scandal sparked broader cultural shifts. Community organizations launched initiatives to educate young people about civic responsibility and ethical leadership. Schools incorporated lessons about the case into their curricula, teaching students about the dangers of greed and the value of standing up for what's right. Art galleries hosted exhibits inspired by Jasmine's courage, featuring paintings, sculptures, and installations that celebrated her role in exposing the truth. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about how "Judge laughs at black woman then freezes" had become one of the most iconic moments in recent history, a testament to the lasting impact of her actions. For Jasmine personally, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The media frenzy surrounding the case eventually died down, allowing her to return to her work with fewer distractions. She continued investigating financial crimes, though now with a heightened awareness of the systemic issues that often enabled such wrongdoing. Each new case reminded her of the importance of perseverance and vigilance. Corruption might take different forms, but its roots were always the same: unchecked power and misplaced priorities. Despite her humility, Jasmine couldn't escape the admiration of those around her. Colleagues looked to her as a mentor, seeking guidance not only on investigative techniques, but also on navigating challenges in a field still dominated by men. Young officers like Marcus, the rookie agent who had thanked her earlier, often stopped by her desk to share updates on their own cases or simply to express gratitude for her example. Jasmine welcomed these interactions, knowing that supporting the next generation was key to creating lasting change. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, Marcus approached her again. This time, he held a folder in his hands. "Detective Cruz," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to show you something." He opened the folder to reveal a series of documents detailing a potential embezzlement scheme within a local nonprofit organization. "I followed your advice about looking for patterns," he explained. "It's not much, but I think it could be worth exploring." Jasmine smiled warmly, impressed by his initiative. "Good work, Marcus," she said, flipping through the pages. "This is exactly the kind of diligence we need. Keep digging. I'll help you figure out the next steps." His face lit up with pride, and she felt a surge of satisfaction knowing she had inspired someone else to carry the torch. Outside of work, Jasmine found solace in small moments of peace. She took long walks along Lake Michigan, letting the cool breeze clear her mind after grueling days. Sometimes she visited her favorite bookstore, browsing shelves filled with mystery novels and memoirs. On weekends, she spent time with family and close friends, savoring laughter and conversation over home-cooked meals. These simple pleasures grounded her, reminding her that while her job was important, so too was taking care of herself. As weeks turned into months, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the early days of tracking down leads on the counterfeiting ring to the tense courtroom confrontation with Judge Langley, every step had tested her strength and resolve. There had been moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of prejudice and resistance threatened to overwhelm her. But she had pushed through, driven by a belief that justice mattered more than personal comfort or recognition. One night, as she sat on her apartment balcony staring at the city skyline, Jasmine allowed herself a rare moment of pride. The lights, twinkling in the distance, seemed to mirror the hope she felt, a hope that the world could become fairer, kinder, and more just if enough people committed themselves to the cause. She thought about all the lives touched by the scandal, the families who had lost everything to counterfeit money, the honest officials who had risked their careers to speak out, and the young officers now inspired to follow in her footsteps. In some small way, she realized her actions had helped ignite a spark of change. Still, Jasmine knew that no victory was final. Corruption was a persistent foe, evolving and adapting to survive. As long as there were opportunities for exploitation, there would be those willing to exploit them. That knowledge fueled her determination to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her to make a difference. The following morning, Jasmine arrived at work early, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. A stack of new case files awaited her on her desk, each one representing a fresh opportunity to uncover the truth. As she sifted through the papers, she reminded herself of the lesson she had learned long ago. Justice wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about doing the right thing even when it was hard. And for Detective Jasmine Cruz, that was more than enough. By midday, the office buzzed with activity. Agents discussed leads, shared findings, and strategized about upcoming operations. Jasmine joined in, offering advice and encouragement where needed. Though she had earned the respect of her peers, she remained humble, always prioritizing teamwork over individual accolades. After all, justice wasn't achieved alone. It took collaboration, dedication, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting golden hues across the city streets, Jasmine packed up her things and headed home. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new obstacles, but she faced them with unwavering resolve. Every step forward was a reminder that perseverance and integrity could overcome even the deepest shadows. And as she disappeared into the night, the legacy of her actions continued to ripple outward, inspiring change in ways she might never fully realize, but that others would carry forward for generations to come.